Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It happened on a warm Friday evening in early September, the kind where the air smells faintly of late summer flowers and the sound of distant traffic feels like a constant hum. I had stopped by Henry's house to drop off some documents for work. He was my boss, but over the past year, we had slipped into something neither of us admitted outright, but both knew existed in the spaces between our words. He answered the door in a plain gray t-shirt, his hair a little mussed, like he had been running his hands through it while thinking. I could smell coffee and something sweet vanilla, maybe drifting from the kitchen. "Come in," he said, his voice low, eyes flicking briefly over my shoulder, as if checking for neighbors. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of his home settling around me. I'd been there before for work reasons, team dinners, holiday parties, but it felt different tonight. The house was quieter, more still. "She's upstairs," he murmured, meaning his wife, Anna. He didn't have to say more. We walked into the kitchen. My pulse was already picking up. I could hear faint music coming from upstairs, probably Anna getting ready for her night out with friends. Henry took the envelope from my hand and set it on the counter without looking at it. Then he turned to face me. "You didn't have to bring this tonight," he said, almost accusing, though his voice was soft. "I know," I whispered. And then it happened. Without another word, he stepped closer, his hands finding my waist as naturally as if they'd been there all his life. I froze for a heartbeat, not because I didn't want it, but because the reality of where we were, of who was upstairs, pressed down on me like a weight. The warmth of his palms seeped through my blouse, his thumbs brushing slow, almost invisible circles. "Henry," I breathed. But I didn't step away. His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, there was nothing in the world but that tiny patch of kitchen, the sound of our breathing, and the muffled footsteps overhead. We didn't kiss. We didn't say anything else. We just stayed there, him holding me like it was the only thing keeping him upright, me leaning into him even though my mind screamed that we were seconds from crossing a line we couldn't uncross. Then, faintly, Anna's voice called from upstairs, asking if he knew where she'd left her phone. We sprung apart like guilty teenagers, though the warmth of his touch stayed with me. "I should go," I said quickly, but when I reached the door, he caught my wrist gently. "Stay a minute," he whispered. I looked at him, really looked at him, the small lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his mouth opened like he wanted to say something more but couldn't, and in that suspended moment, I realized something dangerous. Part of me didn't want him to let go. I left Henry's house that night with my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The night air was cool against my flushed cheeks, and as I walked to my car, I kept telling myself that what happened in that kitchen didn't mean anything. It was just a moment, a slip, an accident. But the truth was, I could still feel the press of his hands on my waist, the warmth of his body, the quiet urgency in the way he had looked at me that weekend. I tried to distract myself, coffee with friends, grocery runs, long walks through the park, but every so often, I'd catch myself thinking about the way his thumbs had moved in those slow, absent circles, as if memorizing me. By Monday, I had almost convinced myself I could act normal. Almost. He came into the office late that day, and when our eyes met, across the conference room table, I knew we were both remembering the same thing. He kept his expression neutral, but his fingers drummed an uneven rhythm on the tabletop, a habit I noticed only when he was restless. Later that afternoon, he stopped by my desk. "I need you to go over the Henderson file with me," he said casually, but there was something tight in his voice. We ended up in his office with the door closed. Papers were spread between us, but neither of us really looked at them. "How's Anna?" I asked finally, though the question tasted strange on my tongue. He hesitated. "She's fine. She's Anna?" There was a pause, a kind of waited silence that filled the room. "About Friday," I began. "Don't," he interrupted softly. Don't apologize. My pulse jumped. Henry, I don't want you to think I regret it, he said, leaning forward slightly. Because I don't. Something shifted in the air between us then. I could feel it in my bones. That dangerous slide from professional to personal, from safe to uncharted. From that day on, we were both more careful and yet not careful enough. We found reasons to talk alone, work lunches that ran long, texts late at night about projects that had nothing to do with work. One evening, we ended up staying late at the office. The rest of the staff had gone home, the building quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. We were sitting side by side, reviewing a presentation, when his knee brushed mine under the table. Neither of us moved away. You drive me crazy, he murmured, not looking up from the screen. I swallowed hard. You shouldn't say things like that. Probably not, he agreed. But there was a faint smile in his voice. The next time it happened, his hands finding my waist again. It wasn't in his kitchen. It was in his office, blinds drawn, the city lights flickering through the narrow gap between them. His touch was slower this time, lingering, deliberate. And this time, I didn't just stand there. I leaned in. The world outside faded the traffic, the deadlines, the fact that his wife was waiting for him at home. In that small, enclosed space, there was only us and the quiet, aching way we wanted. Each other. That night in Henry's office stayed with me for days. I could still see the faint glow from the street lamps casting shadows across his face. Still remember the roughness of his palms when they tightened slightly on my waist. We didn't kiss. Not yet, but something had shifted. That restraint. That was almost more dangerous than the act itself. The next morning, he walked into the office like nothing had happened. Crisp shirt, navy tie, the faintest trace of cologne trailing behind him as he passed my desk. But when he placed the Henderson file in front of me, his fingers brushed mine, a small touch, deliberate enough to let me know he hadn't forgotten it. Either, over the next few weeks, our interactions became a quiet language of their own. A hand at the small of my back when he passed behind me, lingering eye contact during meetings. Texts in the middle of the night, never long, just enough to tether me to him. Still awake? Can't sleep. Thinking about you? It was dangerous, reckless, and I couldn't stop. One rainy Thursday, Anna was away visiting her sister. Henry asked me to stay late and help prepare for a pitch. By the time we wrapped up, the rain was coming down in sheets, and he offered to drive me home. We sat in his car, parked outside my apartment, the windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Neither of us moved to open the door. This is crazy, I whispered. I know, he said, but his voice was low, rough. I don't care. I turned to look at him, and in the soft amber glow of the streetlight, his expression was raw-like. He'd been holding something in for too long. His hand found mine, fingers interlacing, and before I could think better of it, I leaned across the console. The first kiss was unsteady, almost hesitant, but when he pulled me closer, it deepened into something urgent. My heart pounded, the rain drumming against the car as if urging us on. After that night, there was no going back. We began to carve out moments in the spaces between our lives. A coffee shop 2 neighborhoods away where no one knew us. Walks in. The park under the guise of lunchtime meetings. The occasional evening at his place when Anna was at a charity function or out with friends. It wasn't just about the physical pull, though, that was undeniable. It was the way he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't been in years. We talked about everything, from childhood fears to dreams we'd never dared to say out loud. But the secrecy wore on me. Every time his phone lit up with her name, I was reminded of what I wasn't. Every time I caught myself glancing at the door, listening for footsteps, I knew we were balancing on a knife's edge. One evening, it almost came crashing down. We were in his living room, me curled on the couch, him sitting beside me, his arm draped across my shoulders, when we heard the sound of keys at the door. My chest seized. She's home? I whispered. She wasn't supposed to be he said, already on his feet. Go upstairs now. I slipped into the guest bedroom just as Anna's voice drifted in from the hallway. I could hear them talking, his tone calm and practiced. I sat on the edge of the bed, my pulse thundering in my ears, the scent of him still clinging to my sweater. That night, after she went to bed, he came upstairs. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me, running a hand through his hair. We need to be more careful, he said finally. I nodded, but inside, I wondered how much longer we could keep this up before something gave way before. Our need for each other burned away all the caution we thought we had. The weeks after that close call were a study in contradictions. We promised each other to be more careful, but in reality, our caution only made the moments we did steal together burn hotter. The less we could have, the more we craved. Henry started finding excuses to linger near my desk, even when there was no work to discuss. Sometimes he'd drop a file in front of me and lean in close, his breath warm on my ear as he murmured something utterly mundane. Yet the way he said it made my skin hum. I told myself I was still in control, that I could stop this before it went too far. But every time I tried to create distance, he would pull me back in without saying a word, just a glance, a faint smirk, a brush of his hand. One Friday evening, the office was nearly empty when he came into the copy room where I was standing. The hum of the machine was the only sound until he closed the door behind him. Everyone's gone, he said softly. I turned to face him, already feeling the air shift between us. Henry, he stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. Do you know how many times I've thought about this? About us? About how it feels to hold you without wondering who might see? My throat tightened. And yet, he echoed, a faint, rueful smile on his lips. We both know it's not that simple. But he didn't move away. His hand came up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear, fingers lingering. Just a fraction too long, I should have walked out. Instead, I stood frozen, every nerve in my body alive. He finally stepped back, leaving me breathless and with the heavy knowledge that we'd crossed another invisible line. The following week, Anna hosted a dinner party at their home for some of Henry's business associates. I was invited strictly in my capacity as his assistant, but being in that space, surrounded by people who thought they knew the whole truth, was dizzying. At one point, I was in the kitchen helping arrange desserts when Henry came in under the pretense of fetching more wine. His hand grazed my waist as he passed behind me. So quick, so subtle, yet it sent a pulse of heat through me that made it hard to focus. No one saw, no one suspected. And yet, the risk of it made my heart race. Later that night, after the guests had left, I stayed behind to help clean up. Anna went upstairs early, claiming she had a headache. The moment we were alone, Henry stepped into my space and just looked at me. Do you know what I was thinking about all night? He asked. I shook my head, afraid to speak. How impossible it was to be this close to you and not touch you. My breath caught, and for a second I thought he might kiss me, right there in the kitchen. But instead, he reached out, his hand curving around my hip, his thumb brushing in slow circles over the fabric of my dress. I should have pulled away. I didn't doubt it was after that night that our stolen moments became bolder, a quiet corner at a hotel bar where he just happened to book a meeting. An afternoon where we both needed to run errands, but somehow ended up walking by the river, talking for hours until the sky turned to gold. The passion between us wasn't just in the physical touches, it was in the way he listened. The way his eyes softened when I told him something I'd never said aloud. It was in how he remembered every small detail, my favorite coffee order, the book I'd been meaning to read, the song I hummed under my breath when I was lost in thought. It was dangerous, and it was beautiful, and it was beginning to feel inevitable. The days after our riverside walk were different. Something had shifted. The unspoken restraint between us was stretched so thin that the smallest touch felt like it could tear it apart completely. I kept telling myself I could still stop this, that as long as we didn't cross that final line, we could somehow survive without burning everything to ash. But Henry, Henry looked at me like that line was already gone. One Wednesday evening, a storm rolled over the city. I was working late, the office dim except for the warm light of my desk lamp. I didn't hear the elevator, but I felt him before. I saw him, his presence in the doorway like a change in the air. "You're still here," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the sound of rain against the windows. I smiled faintly. Deadlines don't care about weather. He stepped closer, his suit jacket draped over one arm, his tie loosened. The faint scent of his cologne woodsy warm wrapped around me. "Neither do feelings," he said. I froze. Henry, he came to stand beside my desk, his hand bracing against the edge as he leaned down, his eyes catching mine in the lamplight. "I'm tired of pretending that every second I'm with you doesn't feel different. I'm tired of wondering what it would be like if I didn't walk away every time I wanted to touch you." My pulse was everywhere, in my neck, in my fingertips, in my breath that came too quick. The storm outside deepened, the thunder rolling closer, and in that cocoon of rain and shadow, I let myself stop resisting. I stood, and before I could lose my nerve, I stepped into him. His hands found my waist instantly, pulling me close. The first kiss was hesitant, testing, but the moment our lips met, every careful wall we built between us shattered. He kissed me like he'd been starving for it, like he'd been holding back for years instead of months. His hands slid to the small of my back, anchoring me as my fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. The sound of rain, the heat of him, the way his breath mingled with mine, it was overwhelming. When he finally pulled back, it was only far enough to whisper, "I don't care if it's wrong. I can't go back now." Neither could I after that night. There was no more pretending. Every meeting, every errand, every chance we could find became a thread in the tapestry of something both beautiful and dangerous. One afternoon, he drove us to a quiet coastal town for a site visit, though we both knew there was no business reason to be there. We walked the empty beach as the wind tossed my hair around my face. He kept reaching for me, sometimes just brushing his fingers over mine, sometimes holding my hand like he never wanted to let go. At a small seaside inn, he booked a room just for a few hours. The moment the door closed, the outside world disappeared. His jacket was gone before I could think, his lips finding mine with an urgency that left no space for doubt. It wasn't just heat. It was a connection that felt almost terrifying in its depth. He traced my jaw as though memorizing it, kissed me slow and then fierce, whispered things I wasn't sure he'd ever said to anyone else. The kind of words you don't say unless you mean them. When the light began to fade outside, I lay with my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. He played with my hair and murmured, "I wish I'd met you first." I didn't answer. There was no good answer to that from then on. We weren't just falling, we were in it. Passionate love, yes, but also something softer. Shared glances across crowded rooms. His hand on the small of my back guiding me through a doorway. The way he'd text me goodnight even when she was next to him. Because he couldn't end the day without me knowing I was in his thoughts. And though I knew it couldn't last, that it was built on borrowed time, I also knew that in all my life, I had never felt anything as alive as I did in his arms. Weeks turned into months, and Henry and I became masters of secrecy. Every smile across a boardroom table was laced with meaning. Every mundane text, meeting ran late, traffic's awful, was our way of saying I'm thinking of you. We became addicted to stolen moments. Sometimes it was a coffee break in the park, where his hand would rest over mine under the table. Other times it was late-night drives down winding roads with no destination, just his voice in the dark, telling me things he'd never told anyone else. The danger of it only seemed to make it sweeter. Knowing that upstairs, just a floor above us, his wife might be reading a book while we stood too close in the kitchen. It was the kind of tension that burned hotter because we knew it could destroy us. One night, in the middle of December, a charity gala gave us the perfect excuse to be in the same place without suspicion. The ballroom shimmered with gold and crystal, the scent of winter roses in the air. Henry wore a black tuxedo that made him look like every fantasy I'd never dared admit to having. I remember standing at the far end of the room, pretending to admire the ice sculpture when I felt him behind me. His breath brushed my ear. "You look dangerous tonight." I turned slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. "Then you should stay away." His lips curved in a slow smile. "You know, I won't." We danced once, just once, his hand firm at my waist, his other holding mine like he'd never let it go. The music was soft and slow, and though we didn't speak, everything we wanted to say passed between us in that silence. A week later, we met at the coastal inn again. The air was heavy with the salt of the sea, and outside the rain drummed against the windows. Inside, he kissed me the moment the door closed, like a man who had been starving for weeks. There was nothing careful about it this time. We laughed between kisses, pulled each other closer like the space between us was unbearable. The passion was fierce, almost desperate, his hands in my hair, mine fisted in his shirt, both of us breathing like we'd run a mile. But later, as we lay tangled together in the fading light, the mood shifted. He traced slow circles over my hip and said, almost to himself, "I don't know how to stop." I knew he wasn't talking about the touching. He was talking about us. I wanted to tell him we didn't need to stop, that we could just keep stealing time, keep pretending we weren't on a collision course. But deep down, I felt the truth pressing against my ribs like a secret that wanted out sooner or later. Someone would find out. That day came sooner than either of us expected. One evening, after an especially tense meeting at his house, I went to leave. His wife had been upstairs the whole time, supposedly on a call. Henry walked me to the door, his hand brushing mine. I thought that was just a casual goodbye, but then he leaned in, murmured something only I could hear, and his hand slid to my waist. It was such a small movement, such a familiar touch, but the kind that could be read from a distance. And from the top of the stairs, she was watching. The weeks after that were hell. She confronted him. He denied it. She confronted me. I lied, because the truth would have burned us all. But even without proof, she knew Henry started pulling away not because he wanted to, but because he was afraid. Afraid of losing his home, his reputation, everything he built. I understood, but it still felt like a betrayal. One night, he came to see me for what I knew would be the last time. We didn't speak much. We just held each other, memorizing the shape of the moment, the smell of his cologne, the sound of his heartbeat, the way his hand fit perfectly at the small of my back. When we kissed, it wasn't frantic like before. It was slow, deep, full of the ache of knowing that every second brought us closer to goodbye. "I love you," he said against my lips, his voice breaking. "God help me, I love you." "I love you too," I whispered, and it was the truest thing I'd ever said. We stayed like that until the sky began to pale, until he finally pulled away, his fingers lingering on mine until they slipped free. And then he was gone. I never saw him again, not in the way I wanted to. But even now, when the rain is heavy and the air smells like the sea, I remember the feel of his hand at my waist, the sound of his voice in the dark, and the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that had ever mattered. And maybe, for a little while, I was.